Welcome to Strange Dimensions. The interface to alternate realities. Contact experiences. And mysterious phenomena. And now your host for Strange Dimensions Radio. Here's Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Wherever you're at, David Weatherly, always poking his nose into something very dark and mysterious and almost always creepy. And he's got lots of updates to give us on all kinds of things this evening. Investigations at unknown places, black-eyed kids, Bigfoot. I think we're going to run quite a gamut of topics tonight. David is quite a veteran explorer of the unknown. He's been doing this for over 35 years, investigating and writing all over the country and abroad. He's written and lectured on a diverse range of topics, including cryptozoology, ufology, and haunting. Many people out there know of David's work, especially on black-eyed kids and related phenomena, one of my favorite topics. He's also studied shamanic and magical traditions with elders from numerous cultures in Europe, Tibet, Native America, and Africa. This gives him an interesting perspective and edge on a lot of investigations and phenomena. And in addition to being the author of The Black-Eyed Children, he has written Strange Intruders and also has his first anthology, Wood Knocks, about Bigfoot out, and a second one coming out. I'm pleased to say that I'm going to be a feature in that anthology on the interdimensional aspects of Bigfoot. Websites, leprechaunpress.com, and a fabulous blog, twocrowsparanormal.blogspot. David, welcome to the show tonight. So glad to have you back.
Hey, Rosemary. It's always great to talk with you.
Where do we find you now in mid-February?
In mid-February, I've been traveling quite a bit, actually. I just landed in the Southwest again, and we'll probably be sort of in one place for a week or two, maybe, and then off again. You know, I stay on the move quite a bit doing investigations really all over the world, and stayed mostly domestic this past year, but I've got some international things probably coming up again in 2017. And I did just get back from Australia, which I know you're going to do Australia, or have already done it, I guess, at this point. And, you know, it's a great place, and I had some great accounts from down there. I'll be posting on the blog soon, too.
Well, you know, every time I look at your posts on Facebook, it seems like you're somewhere else doing an investigation or research. You travel an amazing amount of time. How do you ever keep up with your writing?
Well, it's been a lot of adjustments. You know, the reason I didn't write any books for actually so many years is because of traveling so much and just spending so much time, as I say, boots on the ground doing investigations. But it got to the point where I just had so much information I wanted to start sharing that I finally did sort of start getting into a rhythm of writing more. And you'll see a few more projects out from me next year, actually. I've got several books in the pipeline that are coming out in 2017, and lots of exciting projects lined up. And I've sort of gotten into a rhythm now where I can write just about anywhere, which is, real benefit with how much I travel and everything.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm sure a lot of your fans are glad to hear that as well, because the books that you have done are highly prized in the paranormal and cryptid communities as being chock full of very interesting information and a lot of in-depth research. When you go out and investigate, what kinds of criteria do you apply when you look around for sites? Because you've been at some very unusual sites that are kind of off the beaten track.
That's true. I had to actually stop and think about that for a moment. I have such a diverse range of interests in this field, which in itself is a little bit unusual. I know that you share that approach too. And One of the people I idolized a lot in this field was John Keel, and he sort of had the same approach. I'm interested in haunted sites and ufology and cryptids and just the whole gamut, even bringing in things like psychic phenomena and ancient mysteries and things like that. So one of the things I have found myself looking for a bit more in the last couple of years are areas that have a real high concentration of that. And I've always sort of been drawn to these, portal areas or window zones, places of high weirdness, so to speak. And, it's drawn me to places like the Uinta Basin, where the Skinwalker Ranch is, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which, of course, everybody knows for the Mothman, but there's a lot more going on there. Cannock Chase in England. These sites are really all over the world. And I find that has the last several years, I find that the amount of weirdness, if you will, and reports are just increasing at a rapid pace. I know there's some people saying that, we're in a cycle where it's sort of going down, but traveling so much, I don't see that. I see more and more paranormal or supernatural activity, if you will.
I would agree with that. I've seen exactly the same thing too, what I would consider an increase in all kinds of activity across the board. And for me, I've wondered, well, how much of this is increased reporting, with more people out doing things and coming forward with them versus an actual increase. I still wind up feeling that we're actually seeing an increase in activity. And have you formulated any theories why? Are we seeing a thinning of interdimensional boundaries? Are more people psychically sensitive?
I think both of those are factors, and I would add in too that I often point out the paranormal, and I use that term in general, has become a part of pop culture. And that's something that certainly people like you and I, when we started in this field, that was not the case at all. We were kind of the weirdos interested in this stuff, and nobody wanted to talk to us. It took a lot of work and effort, pre-internet, to get to this information. At least that was my experience. And, we're sort of seeing the flip side of that now in the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, but particularly in, I'd say, the last 5 years, everyone has a story. Everyone has a story about a ghost or a cryptid or something strange they saw in the sky. And part of that level of comfort comes from, you can turn on the television any given night and there's some kind of reality show with a paranormal theme. So I think that has created a level of comfort. But on the other side, I do think we're in a period of the veil's thinning, so to speak. And that in part comes from my background, having a shamanic approach, speaking to elders all over the world, particularly when 2012 was racing towards us and, the media wanted to hype this whole idea of the end of the world and all this nonsense. But the native cultures really weren't saying that. They were saying that, yeah, it's a transition period, but it's really a period where we're going to see things open up in a different way. And people are going to experience more things because there's simply more coming through. Hand in hand with that, I definitely think that, overall people are starting to develop a different level of sensitivity, if you will. And it's kind of curious because if you look just at the world, in general, you see a lot of what seems to be dumbing down of sensitivity with people so focused on social media and glued to their phones and everything. I think a lot of people are becoming a bit more oblivious, but then the other side of that is I think that there's a different segment of people who are starting to pull away a little bit and open up a bit more. And that's leading to, some unique things.
Well, definitely in the field of paranormal investigation, for individuals who are going to be serious about it and they put in a lot of time, I really do think that just naturally they start opening up psychically, even though they may say to themselves that they don't consider themselves to be psychic. It's almost impossible to investigate the paranormal without having that sensitivity.
Absolutely.
One of the things, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's funny you bring that up because I hear that all the time from investigators who have been in the field a long time. I hear both things. I hear people who just start to get into it and claim that they're sensitive, and I don't see any evidence of it. But I also see people that have been in the field a long time and, say, well, no, I'm not really psychic, but boy, they demonstrate all of the aspects of having a certain level of intuitive ability, because you do become sensitive the longer you're in this field, just by default.
I agree with that. One of the things that's troubled me, however, in this trend toward more activity is the skewing toward the dark side of things.
Oh,
and
yes.
Of course, on the shows, the reality shows, the ghost hunting shows, and even some of the recreations like My Haunted House and A Haunting, where stories are retold, there is an emphasis on being terrified. And I'm wondering how much of a factor that's been in this trend toward the dark side.
Yeah, that's very concerning to me, too. And I know that you and I have had a lot of private conversations about this, Rosemary. There seems to be a good chunk of the population within the paranormal community that really wants to default to everything being demonic or sinister to some degree. Now, I don't deny for a moment that stuff is out there. It certainly is, and I've seen a lot of evidence of it. But, we get into this sort of rabbit hole question where we have to wonder how much of people focusing on that so much is actually drawing it to us. We know so little about the capacity of the human energy field and our consciousness, and exactly what we can help co-create in this existence that we're all experiencing. And I've seen situations where people are, I almost hesitate to use the word, but conjuring the demonic in a sense. And I try to make a great effort when I go to locations, or if I go with fellow investigators, to not assume that at the beginning. But there have been places that we've went and, it's coming through, and it's very clear that some nasty things went on there. The big thing I tell people is that if you're going to investigate in this field, you need to have some kind of a foundation, a spiritual foundation that offers you some type of protection. And, I don't push any particular religion or spirituality on anyone. I think you need to find what naturally fits for you and be adept and comfortable with using that if you're going to go to these places, because I meet far too many people who dabble in this field and they come away with, attachments and negative effects from what they're dealing with. It's not something that should be a casual hobby. It really isn't. And that's what it's become in a lot of ways.
I agree. Very well put, too. I'm often asked by paranormal investigators what my advice is for how they can improve as investigators. And my answer is meditate as often as you can, ideally daily, and have a spiritual foundation. And I get a lot of strange looks. I think people expect me to say something like, well, run out and get this gadget. Be sure you say a certain prayer before you go into a haunted place. And it's a much more serious undertaking. But David, over 100 years ago, when the field of psychical research started, especially the efforts of the Society for Psychical Research that was founded in London, and those individuals who were largely academics as well as some scientists, when they went out trying to validate phenomena and evidence for survival, and they investigated mediums and all kinds of psychic experiences, nobody had an emphasis on the demonic. There was never any assumption that if you contacted spirits, you were going to be beat over the head with something evil. What happened to us?
Oh, I think the short answer to that is reality television. I think that the fact that a lot of these shows, which I know people on almost all the shows, I don't have anything against them, but it's often forgotten that is entertainment. And when you see a team on a show go into a location and, we get 40 minutes of airtime of them getting all this stuff, really to properly investigate something, you need hours in a location. And often, there are lag times where where things just don't happen. But television by nature has to distill that down to a few sensational clips that get people's attention. And, what's more dramatic than something, sinister or evil popping out? And I think that, that combined with the fact that, as the natives say, we're at a time where the veils are thinning and a lot of these darker entities can come through easier if people on this side are focusing on that, then it becomes 10 times easier for those entities to, make contact or come through. So, we sort of have come to a place where it's like a perfect storm of all of these factors coming in and, creating situations where, there are some real dark presences active on this planet right now.
Well, speaking of which, I was fascinated to find out recently that in one of your investigations at a fairly unknown place, Revenant Acres in Indiana, I want to hear more about that. You got bit.
I did, Rosemary, and I could, I told you that, and I could even, we were just messaging, and I could feel your reaction. It was kind of funny. 40 years doing this stuff, and I've never been bitten somewhere, but it happened at this location, and it's a really dark, creepy place. I would say it's one of the most disturbing places I've ever been in, hands down. I would rate it maybe number one, certainly in the top five. There's just something very wrong about this place. And for those, most of your listeners have probably never heard of this place. It's in Indiana. It's in a rural location. It's an old farmhouse that was built in the 1800s. And there's very, very little history on this place. The sort of home team that manages the location, they're law enforcement officers. And, to me, that kind of ups the ante a little bit when you're dealing with people like that, because, a lot of people feel that increases the veracity of the reports. I find it interesting because, trained law enforcement personnel are observers. And they notice a lot of things that, many average people don't. And these guys have had some really weird experiences there. We went to the location, and when we say we, I investigate sometimes with a couple of cohorts. We call ourselves the Society of the Supernatural, SOS for short. And that's Dave Spinks and Sean Austin from Demon Files. And Dave and I, by ourselves, investigated the location about a year and a half ago, something like that. And we were having so many strange experiences in the place. The bite occurred when, to sort of paint the picture for you, there's a room where there are a lot of reports that women are harassed and, pushed and so forth. We were running a ghost spot session in that room, and something was communicating, and it was being sort of a smart aleck, with its responses. And I finally said, okay, Dave, let's try something else. I'm going into the front room, and in the front room there is a old piano and a piano bench. I sat down on this piano bench, and it's a very tiny place. So it was easy for us to hear each other. And I told Dave, I said, ask this, whatever's communicating, if I'm sitting or standing. And the response was, he's standing. And I said, wrong. And as soon as I said that, I was straddling this piano bench. And what I felt was a sensation of almost something the size of a child crawling under this bench and sort of coming up between where both my legs were and pushing against the bench. And it literally, it was as if it was trying to stand up and throw me off this bench. And in order not to fall on the floor, I quickly stood up, and the bench toppled over. And this is when the incident happened. Now, I didn't realize at that moment that I'd been bit. I felt something strange on my leg, but I thought it was just from where the piano bench had hit it. And later on, in fact, it was the next day, because it was cold weather. I was wearing jeans. The next day, I discovered this bite on the inside of my leg. And, we have pictures of it. It's very clear. It's around the shape. You can see the teeth marks. It's something maybe the size of, a woman's mouth or an older child's. And it was just the most bizarre incident. Now, what's even more compelling is that we recently went back to Revenant Acres the week before Halloween, and Sean Austin was with us this time. He spoke to, now he didn't know he didn't know everything about Revenant Acres that we did. We filled him in on a little bit of it. He knew that I'd been bitten, but he was speaking to a friend of his who's an intuitive when we were on our way to Revenant Acres, and he didn't tell her anything. He didn't even tell her the name of the location. He just said, we're going to this location, and I want to know what you pick up on it. And she literally said, well, there's the spirit of a woman who was abused at the location, and she likes to bite.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
So,
what a corroboration.
Yeah, it was, we were all kind of blown away by the information. And as I said, there's very little information about this site. One of the things that I found fascinating about it, the first time we went, we were speaking with one of the sheriff's deputies who managed the location. And I said to him, is there anything at all? Have you been able to find anything about the history of the house? They found the original owners, and the people who built the house were named Van Meter. Now, this kind of put the bells off in my head, because I'm thinking, Van Meter, that's so bizarre. Now, we're in Indiana, but I couldn't let this go, and I know you know where I'm going with this. I later, when I was able to research a little bit, I started researching the Van Meter family, and found out that the Van Meter family that lived in Indiana, at least some segment of it, did indeed move to Iowa and found the town of Van Meter, Iowa, which is where a whole bizarre set of events occurred in 1903 with what they called the Van Meter Visitor, with this bizarre cryptid thing that came out of the underground and had bat-like wings, and it's a very notable experience. This creature came out of a coal mine. All these people reported seeing it and chasing it, and it disappeared. So, it kind of made me think, wow, could this be the same family? What's the connection here? And, I always look for those types of things. Now, I haven't been able to find further details. I'm really intrigued to know if it is indeed the same family. Maybe more research will determine. But beyond the people who built the house, there's a massive gap between Revenant Acres as it was founded and where it is today. We do know from the law enforcement guys that the house was abandoned for many years and used as a drug house, and a lot of crime purportedly happened there, and there's rumors of satanic activity. There have been a couple of documented possessions in the house, and there's an absolutely stunning piece of footage that in fact we have a DVD coming out on the location with some of our investigation there, and a piece of footage that is, Rosemary, it's one of the strangest things I've ever seen, and it is indeed, it appears to be a possession.
Well, I'll bet you do find some more connections on the Van Meter angle. It's too much of a synchronicity to not have a deeper connection. But how did this place land on the paranormal radar? Was it after these law enforcement people took it over? Because, it doesn't have a history as an investigation site going back very far.
No, it doesn't. And, it's another aspect of it. I mean, there's very, very little history at all about this place. As far as I know, a local team had, tried some investigations there, probably just because it was an abandoned place. And it is really creepy looking. It's an unusual house. It's 2 stories in the front, but there's only one room upstairs. So you sort of have this odd shaped, old farmhouse that is 2 stories in the front, 1 room upstairs, and I think 2 in the front part downstairs. And then there was an addition that was put on at some point that has, a couple of additional rooms and a small kitchen. But the place is old. There's not even a bathroom in the place. And since it was sort of a flop house and had a weird reputation, a couple of people started investigating and getting some evidence in there, and it grew from that. The law enforcement team, they obviously do investigations, and they started getting some strange things from the place and ended up managing it for the owners and allowing people to come in and investigate. And they occasionally do public events and things there. It's a little bit difficult because of the size of the place, but it's it's still relatively unknown, and it's a gold mine at the same time in terms of activity, but it's not a place for an amateur team to go at all. I don't believe that it is.
David, we've got to take a short break right now. I wanted to come back and ask a few more questions about this Revenant Acres place. It sounds fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Strange Dimensions on KGRAradio.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back with my fascinating guest tonight, David Weatherly.
The healing powers of silver, Ion Silver, an antiseptic powerhouse used for centuries. Now you can harness the benefits of Ion Silver in a convenient spray. Ion Silver is a highly effective antimicrobial spray that's safe for family and pets. Excellent for wound care, a must for your first aid kit. It binds to bacteria, viruses, and fungus to immediately destroy them. Also used as an underarm deodorant, acne preventative, surface disinfectant, and more. Buy Ion Silver at ionsilver.us. That's ionsilver.us.
Did you know 40% of all cancer could be prevented? That's a fact. Along with maintaining appropriate body weight and regular exercise, the American Institute for Cancer Research and the USDA confirm that eating 9 to 11 servings of fruits and vegetables every day is the key. Now ask yourself, am I at risk? How many servings of fruits and vegetables did I eat today? Balance of Nature has solved this problem and provides an easy and affordable way to consume over 10 servings of 31 different whole fruits and vegetables every day.
Call now to find out how to get your free month's supply of Balance of Nature. Call 800-2468-751. That's 800-2468-751. Call now, 800-2468-751. Or go online to balanceofnature.com.
Use promo code TSL.
We will never fully understand what we've asked of our military service members or their families, asking them to put themselves in harm's way, to endure it all. But we do understand that it's our turn, our duty, to keep them secure for the rest of their lives. Wounded Warrior Project long-term support programs help our most severely ill or injured veterans live independently, at no cost, for life, so that they might stand at ease. Join us at findwwp.org.
Your UFO paranormal powerhouse of live alternative talk radio. KGRA, The Planet.
And we're back with my fascinating guest tonight, David Weatherly, paranormal investigator and author. We're talking about some creepy places that David has investigated recently, a place called Revenant Acres in Indiana, where he got bit and where all kinds of dark things have gone on. David, just before the break, you were mentioning that you have a clip of a possession. Is this a case that you witnessed yourself, or you came into possession of the possession clip?
It's actually a clip from the law enforcement guys who were doing a small public event there, and a young man had come in to take part in the investigation, and they were filming and caught this bizarre situation where he very clearly appears to be taken over by something. And it's, like I said, it's one of the most compelling things I've ever seen. He has his arm sort of contorted in a way that's just not humanly possible. He's speaking in something, and this goes on for, I forget how long the clip is. We've gotten permission to include it in our DVD when it comes out, so everyone will get a chance to see it. And there's so many layers to what's going on at that location. This kid, they finally got him outside and were able to get him to become clear or shake off whatever was influencing him. And as he was standing out in the yard, he made a comment to one of the guys. He said, I hear it trying to call me back inside. And he was looking up at the second floor window of this place, so that he heard this tapping on the window. Now, that's something that we had experienced on our investigations there, this strange tapping noise from the upstairs window, as if something wanted you to come inside, was beckoning to you. The last investigation we did there, the three of us were upstairs, and we were actually live streaming this portion of this investigation when something shook the house. And it was so loud, Rosemary, that people on the live stream heard this. Now, we felt it. And it felt like a truck had run into the side of the house, for lack of a better explanation. We didn't know quite what to think of it. We actually kind of ended the investigation there. We'd been at it for several hours, and when this occurred, as I said, the whole house, you could hear the whole house, or you could feel the whole house shake, and you could hear this sound that people watching us heard. And following that, there were all these voices coming from downstairs, and the sound of footsteps, and as if something was trying to rush through the house and come up the steps. And you couldn't distinguish exactly what they were saying, but it had that rather sinister tone. It was sort of and multiple voices. And we decided at that point, okay, we've been at this several hours. We've collected a lot of information, and it's in our best interest at this point to go ahead and leave. So we wrapped things up and cleared out of there. But just so many different strange things occurred during that investigation. Dave had stuck a recorder in his pocket at one point. It wasn't turned on, had it in his jacket pocket, and at some point something turned the recorder on, and it caught a bunch of EVPs. So, there's a lot of very physical things that occur at the location, as well as just a whole gamut of bizarre things coming across ghost boxes and EVPs, and virtually every piece of equipment we took in there reacted in some fashion, and it's a fascinating and disturbing place all at the same time.
What do you think haunts that place?
Well, whatever it is tries to pretend to the demonic. But what I believe it probably is a combination of things. I think that there are some very negative human entities that were probably living at the location at some point that have passed away and chosen to remain there. And I also think that there are some victims who are stuck there. There's some evidence that, possibly some type of satanic activity was carried out there at one point. Of course, we know that there was a lot of drug use and things like that there. There are rumors of a number of women being abused there. Now, this has come from 2 or 3 different psychics at this point. So you start to look at how these things sync up. I mean, we've had at least 3 psychics, I believe, tell us that women were abused there, and that it happened very often right where the steps go up to the second floor. Now, those steps, there is an old house, so there's a doorway that, the doorway goes right to a flight of steps that go up to that second floor. And right where that doorway is where the piano and the piano bench set right beside that. So that seems to be one of the hot spots in the house. And, obviously, we believe at this point that a lot of the negative activity and abuse occurred right there where that center point is.
Interesting about the possible masquerading of something demonic, or perhaps that's the way people choose to interpret what happens there. Now, you had also mentioned that this is not the place for the idle curious, the amateurs. It's kind of heavy duty in what goes on and dangerous to boot. So what advice would you have for investigators who are listening, also reading about Revenant Acres, and think that they might want to go out and give it a shot?
Well, again, I go right back to, the early part of our conversation. I think you need to have a good spiritual foundation going into a location like this. I think a lot of times what we deal with at these places are people who were, I'm trying to think of a word that's good for the airwaves, people who were, really nasty in life and passed away and choose to stay or get stuck in a spiritual form. If they were jerks when they were living and abusers and criminals, then, they're going to do whatever they can in spirit form to get a reaction. And, if they can pretend to be devils or demonic or, Satan himself in order to terrify people, they're really going to enjoy that. So that's what they're going to try to do. But either way, you're looking at a very negative entity, and you simply need to have some kind of personal spiritual protection, I believe, going into a place like this. It's also not a place to investigate solo. You want to go in with, some people that you trust and feel confident with in terms of their abilities to investigate. So those are the 2 big things I would suggest.
Excellent advice. So there you have it, folks. Some cautions and advice and words of warning about Revenant Acres. David, you've been at another location that I'm much more familiar with, and no shortage of weird things going on there, and that's Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the epicenter of Mothman activities. And you were just there in 2016, I believe. Cover anything new or different, or what's happening there?
Oh, sure. In fact, I was just there maybe 2 weeks ago. And every time I go to Point Pleasant, I'm really fascinated by the place for a number of reasons. One is that I sort of get to walk in the footsteps of John Keel, which is always a pleasure. And two, it's one of those places that I mentioned earlier. It's a vortex of high strangeness. Now, most people know the location for the Mothman encounters, but there's so much more that goes on there. There are a lot of haunted locations. There's reports of other cryptids in the area, from Dogman to other strange flying anomalies or UFO reports. Just runs the whole gamut. And whenever I go, we try to look into some of the areas that have been places of interest in the past, like the bunkers and so forth. And we also try to look into other reports. Now, as I mentioned, Dave Spinks and I were just there a couple of weeks ago, and we stayed at the Lowe Hotel, which is right downtown. It's across the street from the Mothman Museum. And the Lowe itself is quite haunted. There are reports of a wide range of spirits, some really interesting things. There's a piano that plays itself purportedly, and there's the ghost of a ship's captain that's supposed to wander the halls, a toddler, and a wide range of other things. We had something really curious happen on both of our last two trips there, and that was an interesting name coming across on Ghostbox, and multiple ghost boxes, as a matter of fact, different devices. We kept getting the name Indrid Cold. Now,
that's a famous name.
Oh, yes, it is. And anyone at all familiar with, the Mothman prophecies or have read much on Point Pleasant, they will have seen that name turn up. He purportedly was the grinning man himself. He's really tied into the whole mythos, if you will, of the Point Pleasant region. And that's not a name that's going to come across radio waves. It's, outside of a show like this, it's not something that people are talking about. So when you're using these boxes and scanning through frequencies, it's a really curious thing to have come across, and especially when it comes across multiple times, and not just the word cold, but Indrid. I mean, who's named Indrid? So
only the alien who came out of that spaceship.
That's right.
And confronted Woody Derenberger.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you think Indrid is looking for a new contact now that Woody's not around?
That's very possible. And, for some reason, seems to be very tied into Point Pleasant itself, which is, I guess, not too much of a surprise. We're looking at 50 years now of, since the original Mothman sightings. And, of course, next year we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of the collapse of the Silver Bridge. So I think it's a highly charged time period when you go there. And, of course, we were there in December, which is when the bridge collapsed. So, in fact, the past 2 Decembers, we've been there around the same time. And it's an interesting time to get to Point Pleasant because, there aren't any tourists showing up in Point Pleasant much anyway, except during the Mothman Festival. And certainly in December, the town is very, very low key. It's one of those places that sort of rolls the sidewalks up at 5 o'clock, and it becomes very quiet. And, we had the hotel to ourselves. So it was a pretty fascinating experience both years that we've been there around that time. But we've encountered other strange things in Point Pleasant too. Last year, Dave Spinks and I were there, and we were out around the bunkers, and we had a really, really weird thing occur. We were driving around the area of the bunkers, and of course this is all, basically gravel and dirt road. And we passed an area where there's a very large pull-off, and there was a deer laying in this pull-off area. Now, Dave was driving. We sort of rolled past it. We weren't going very fast. We rolled past it, and we both were glancing over at it, and he stopped the car. We backed up, and we were looking at it from the vehicle and knew that something was really strange. So we immediately got out and went to investigate. Now, Rosemary, this thing, the top of its head had been ripped off. And I use that word specifically because that is exactly what it looked like. It looked like just this weird mutilation. The lower jaw was there, but nothing else. The rest of the corpse, however, was intact. And we examined it quite thoroughly. There were no signs of a gunshot. It got stranger the more we looked at it, because you would think that if something had hit this carcass or this deer, that there would be signs where the carcass maybe, bounced on the gravel a little bit. There would be skid marks from a vehicle. We found none of that. We found no tracks from a vehicle, no other footprints except ours, no deer prints. So it wasn't even as if this creature had been walking around in the area or on the road or anything. For all intents and purposes, it looked like this thing just fell out of the sky. It was the strangest thing.
That's chilling. Absolutely chilling.
Things, well, right. And one of the things that really got me about it, we were standing there examining this, and I said, what's really weird, Dave? No scavenger has touched this carcass. Now, this is an area that's full of, vultures and crows and wild dogs and coyotes and, plenty of scavengers that readily take advantage of things like this. Nothing had touched it. Furthermore, there were no insects on this thing. Now, that I could discount and say, well, okay, it is cold weather, but still, you would expect maybe maggots or something to have started breeding already, but there was nothing, no sign of anything like that. And the other bizarre thing is there was no sign of blood anywhere on the ground.
It's very similar to the cattle mutilation syndrome.
It very much is. Now, there's another weird twist to this thing, because as we started investigating this site, we were going in a circle out from the carcass looking for any kind of evidence. A bit out from the site, we found one singular anomalous footprint, and it wasn't deep enough to cast or anything. It was a very large print, and we're just not sure exactly what it was.
What was it shaped like?
It was shaped like a human foot, but it was much larger than a human foot. And
looking like it had a shoe on, or barefoot,
no,
maybe a Bigfoot print.
It has some kind of toes or claws or something that you could just make out. Now, like I said, I don't want to race to conclusions on that. It was an anomaly because it was a singular thing that we found in that whole area. But I can't even hardly speculate on what it was. But as we were widening our circle, we were so wide out at this point that I had crossed the road and was looking at the edge of the other side of the road just to see if I could find anything, when we both looked further down the road in the direction that we were heading. And here was a very odd looking canid coming out onto the road. Now, this just ups the level of bizarre to me, because we're both standing there looking at this thing. We had a GoPro running in the car, so we did get some footage of it. Unfortunately, it's a little far away. But Rosemary, this thing walked and behaved like the classic Texas chupacabra. Whatever it was, it was canid in form. It stayed on all four legs, but it sort of had this weird hunched over movement, and it looked hairless, or perhaps heavy mange or something. And it was moving in this really bizarre fashion. It was crossing the road. We quickly got in the vehicle and tried to slowly approach it. Of course, it had spotted us and darted off into the woods. And we got up to the location where it was, and couldn't find any sign of it. It had taken off at that point. But how much stranger can Point Pleasant get? I guess that's the question.
Every time I ask myself that question, something else weird happens there. It is truly ground zero for a lot of bizarre things.
It really is.
I have not heard of many other cases of mutilated animals, certainly nothing to that extent. And the weird canine, about how big was that? Was it large dog, wolf size?
Oh, it was the size of a large dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought at first, we both were looking and we thought, okay, it's maybe a coyote or a wild dog. There are some out there in that area, but if that's what it was, one, it had some kind of mange. Two, the coloring was really odd, which could be accounted for by mange, and three, the movements were just so bizarre, the way this thing was making its way across the road.
Well, I've been there many times. I've stayed at the Lowe Hotel every year since 2004. The first time I spoke at the Mothman Festival, which occurs in September every year now. And I've experienced a lot of the activity that you just described. I have been out in the bunker areas, that old TNT plant. And for people who don't know too much about the Mothman story, that's where Mothman was first sighted in 1966. These old abandoned munitions bunkers from a old TNT plant. By the way, was that deer carcass, was that near any particular bunker that's usually one of the ones heavily visited?
No, it was a bit further back, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 main ones that are visited very frequently, and of course you can keep going back. That road goes back quite a ways, and it was a bit further back away from the main bunkers. People don't tend to go too far into that area because you can, in short order, get to where a couple of the bunkers are, well traveled, so to speak, and a couple of the open ones that people like to go to. But this was a bit further back.
I'm particularly intrigued by the Indrid Cold name cropping up in EVP. Because that story with Woody Derenberger and his encounters with the alien identified as Indrid Cold, such a fascinating story. Where this entity came to him repeatedly after it came down allegedly in a ship while he was driving home from work one night from Clarksburg to where he lived in Mineral Wells, which is not too far from Point Pleasant. And Woody just really kind of went off on this alternate reality journey where he claimed that he was aboard Indrid's spacecraft and he visited Lanulos, the planet that Indrid and his kind supposedly came from. People would gather in huge crowds out on his lawn at night to hear him make a pronouncement about his latest encounters with Indrid Cold. And all of that came to an end with Woody. So, people have speculated, well, how much of this was really Woody, maybe elaborating on an experience or two, and how much of it was the fact that Woody was the primary human sort of antenna for this. And maybe Indrid Cold has been looking for a new one. Maybe you're it.
Well, that would be interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but that's kind of what I'm in the field for. So we'll see what happens. We actually had his name coming through the previous year when we were out around the bunkers, and we did some investigations, some night investigations out around the bunkers, and we had Indrid Cold coming across at that point too. So who knows.
Well, another famous name, and I wanted to ask you about this on the show tonight, another famous name that you've gotten a lot in your EVPs and investigations all over the place is that of John Zappis's uncle, Ed Warren, who died in 2006. Have you had any increase in communication from him?
It has stayed at about the same level, which means that pretty much every time I'm out investigating, he comes through. He did indeed come through while we were at the Lowe Hotel. And, I always approach this in that when I first hear Ed coming through at any given location, I try to determine, okay, is this a different Ed connected to this particular location. And admittedly, it's gotten a little bit frustrating at this point, because while he comes through consistently, I can't seem to get any further information, no matter how many different ways it's asked, how can I help? What can you tell us? It's always the same types of messages over and over and over again. So I honestly, I'm just not sure what to think of it at this point. I'm kind of curious to see, what happens if 2 or 3 of us get together with John and try to do one of these sessions and see if, maybe that will help put the pieces together, so to speak. But as you and I have discussed before, Rosemary, I started in this field in the 70s, and of course the Warrens were kind of one of the few, some of the few celebrities, so to speak, in the field. So they, were out there doing this work when I was a kid, and that was compelling to me and helped me realize, wow, I can do this stuff full time, one way or the other. So, I always sort of honored the fact that they were able to, pursue what they were called to do. And, of course, Ed in particular was, I always felt a very strong figure in the field. And, the fact that he is coming through has become both sort of an honor and, like I said, a little bit of point of frustration at this point, because I feel like I want to do, if he really does need some kind of help, or if there's some message I can convey, I'm more than willing to do that. But, I need a little bit more to go on. So.
You mentioned that he gives kind of the same sorts of messages over and over again. And what are those about? Are they single words or sentences, or? There's
some of both. I get terms like there's something that consistently comes up about a box. There's terms like follow the blood, take the crucifix, and of course there's constant affirmations that help me with this. I need help. So clearly there's some kind of message trying to get through, but I'm just not sure how to push past that point and get something more out of this. And he shows up everywhere. It's all over the country. I've had him show up abroad when I'm doing investigation. So, just in the past couple of months, Halloween week, when we were out doing investigations, we had him at locations in Indiana. We had him in Kentucky. Just a couple of weeks ago, he showed up in Point Pleasant. So, he clearly is hanging around trying to get something through.
Well, we've had, John and I, we've had the same situation where a lot of messages and given to a lot of people, but staying within the same range, references to books and files and paying attention. And some of it seems to be very personal for John. And maybe we'll need to get you out to Connecticut sometime where we can sit down with John and have a session, see if we can reach a breakout point on that.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Well, David, we're just about at the end of our show tonight. LeprechaunPress.com and your Two Crows Paranormal .blogspot, the two places where people can go to get information about you. What have you got coming up?
There's a new book coming out in a couple of weeks called Haunted Toys that I co-authored with a friend of mine, Ross Allison. Woodknots Volume 2 will be out early next year, and I'm happy to say that you're contributing to that, along with another cast of, I think, A-list cryptozoologists. So that series is going to continue. And a few other surprises coming along next year, as well as a couple of DVDs that Society of the Supernatural has put together with some of these investigations. In fact, the Mothman stuff we were discussing will show up on a DVD, as well as Revenant Acres and a few other surprises.
Well, I'm sure our paths will cross on down the paranormal road. Thank you so much, David, for being with me tonight on Strange Dimensions Radio. Don't go away, folks, because there's more great stuff coming right up. Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. We'll see you next week on Down That Paranormal Road. Good night.